Hi again. Here we are to continue talking about React Native. And in the last video, we started the discussion of state and stateful components. So what I'd like to do is continue from there. And so far, our component looks like this. And we've got, like our text field set up here to display the time. And then we've got a button here to run and pause the timer. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to just handle the button first. So that'll be a simple one. So you're going to tap on the button, and it's going to change from run to pause. And then if you tap it when it says pause, it'll change to run. So how we're going to handle that is by using this onPress method to change the state from, the on property of state from true to false or false to true. And then when we do that, the component will see that state has been updated, and it will call render again and redraw our button. Okay, so part of this means that also that the title here needs to change based on the value for on. So if on is false, then we want to say run, and if on is true, we want to say pause. Okay, so and if you tested this from the previous video, I kind of blocked this in as onPress with the curly brackets. You'll get an error for that because you need to define a method here, right? So it's kind of telling us that we can't define nothing for this, right? So don't worry about that. We're going to fix that. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a method to our timer class that we will call from this onPress. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll define on button press, something like that, right? And we'll just define this as a simple function here. And what we'll do is we'll call it from down here. I'm going to move this onto its own line like that, and then maybe that'll read a little more clearly, right? Okay, so how do we call onPress? Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. Since this method belongs to this component, we're going to put this here and then say on button press, right? And then this method we'll call that function up here, right? And then in here, what we can do is we can say now right here, what we want to do is we want to change our state. Okay, now here's the key thing about understanding state. We could do this, dot on equals, not this dot state dot on. Now this will work. It will change the value, but it won't cause our component to re-render. Okay, and the reason why is even though we're changing state, React doesn't see that we've changed it. Okay, React won't see that state has been changed. So anytime you change state inside of a component, you can't change state directly. Okay, what you need to do is you need to call set state. So I'm going to call this. So the proper way to do this is to call this dot set state. Okay, and whenever you set state, you can include a JavaScript object with just the portion of state that you want to change. So what I want to do here is I want to call, I want to include an object that just has this on property in it. Since I'm not changing the time here, then I don't need to set the time here. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to say on will be not this dot state dot on. Okay. So the logical operator here will switch, the true false value from on to, or from true to false or false to true, right? So this will make it the opposite of what it is. We'll set that as a new object with an on property. And when we call set state, internally the component here, because we're inheriting, set state from component. So component will run set state and update the state here, find this property that matches the property here, and give it the new value. But by calling set state, it will see that we've changed state, and then it will mark this component for a redraw, and we'll call render again, and then we'll change the value. Okay, so let's we can't quite test that yet. Let's refresh this just to get rid of that red there. What we need to do now is when we render, is we will need to check the on property of state and then determine what the title for the button should be. So why don't we do this? Let's say const title equals, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say this dot state dot on, and then I'll use the I forget what they call this. It's like a single line if statement. So I'm going to put a question mark, and so if this is true, then we'll set title to so if we're on, we want it to say pause, and then we'll put the colon, and if we're not on, then it'll say run. Okay, so if this state.on is true, we'll pass we'll include this string or assign this string to title, and if this .state.on is false, we'll assign this string to title. Okay, and then the title down here we can put inside here, right? So instead of using the string there, we'll include the title variable. And since it's an expression, we have to wrap it in the curly braces. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Let's save it and give it a test. Oh, I got a problem. What does it say here? Undefined evaluating this .state.on. Oh, I forgot one thing. This is a great example, okay? Since the on press button uses this, and I've called this button press here, really we're passing this method, a link to this method or a reference to it into this React component, right? And when it executes there, this represents something else. It's not the same this as we have here, right? So what we'll need to do is we'll need to bind this on this function call to this component, okay? I know it's a little confusing, but what we're going to do is we're going to call the method here, and we want to make sure that this belongs to this component, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say this .on button press .bind this, okay? Let's give it another try. So I'll refresh, I'll click my button and it says pause, and then I'll click it and it says run. Now that last example there may look a little confusing. Let me write it another way, and this will probably make it more confusing, but if you remember these two methods right here of linking to methods within your code from an expression in JSX, you can pretty much solve all these problems, right? So one is if you want to call a method, right, inside your component, then you'll need to bind to this, okay? So if that method has calls on this in here, then you'll have to bind it. As an alternative to this arrangement here, you can also do it this way. If you write an anonymous function, then that anonymous function can call, button press like that, okay? And then that'll work the same way, though it will be a little bit different, okay? So here, if I had more code, I could run it here, right? But now I'm inside this this closure, I'm calling this button press. So actually, like, the code is kind of run here, right? I'm going to switch back to the first one because it's a little bit shorter and I don't need all the extra code, okay? So anyway, there you go. There's a couple examples there, and we've got our button set up. And in the next video, we'll start tackling the timer, okay? And we'll have to talk about the date object and some other features, right? And we'll also talk about how the timer is going to update and render our component, right? Because it'll need to do that every time we change the time on the timer, then it will have to re-render and change the time here displayed in the text field. Okay, so thanks for watching, and I hope that was informative.